As doctors, we learn physiology, anatomy, histology. We have to know the map of the body. Nobody of you would want to go to a surgeon who doesn't know anything about anatomy. Or would somebody want to go there? Okay. So now we know from meta health, we call it bio, psycho, social, spiritual. So we know we are more than the human flesh. And we're also more than the emotions that are motivating, driving us. There's something invisible, an indwelling energy that makes our heart pump and organizes the 70 billion cells that they work together as a unit. And this indwelling intelligence has also an invisible structure within us. And that's what I call the anatomy of our being. And we need to know that. Without knowing that, we do not understand who we are.
So, when I'm really deep in that, I can't let this go. Then there's no movement in this element no more. Then it's like it gets stuck. Actually, the traditional Chinese Wu Qing, it's about the transformation. It's not really, the words are not really elements, but it was agreed upon that when the two are in balance, matter is created. So that's why it's elements. Yeah. How do you create a child? Masculine, feminine, balanced, matter is created. New. Am I supposed to call a child a matter? So, when this gets out of balance, my sadness, it's like it locks down. And then we can no longer control the anger. Then it becomes, the anger is here. So they also call it the grandmother rule, like the grandmother can look down from a different perspective and is controlling in some ways. So the metal, when it doesn't work, when it's unbalanced, then it's no longer able to control the anger. And us human, we are just masters at compromising ourselves and being stressed for like forever.
So of course we find Yuden moments, we find shock traumas, but we don't find have to find a shock trauma related to every single process we find in the here and now. We can find sometimes those responses and the triggers which would lead us back to a Yuden, which might have been in our early childhood or even before. Is that something that you could confirm? Yes. Right. So that this can be a stress trigger. It does not need to be a Yuden moment at every time. So then we have the stress phase, which actually is a freeze phase, which is not a milliseconds freeze moment and we come out of it, but the stress pattern here is actually creating just the excess of what is happening in those milliseconds, but over a longer time. This would mean an inhibition of life functions, as we learned. So this would mean a paralysis process. This would, of course, then also mean tissue degradation in that first phase, as we know from the minus plus type of process that we are going through when we are talking about like the new brain, the cerebral medulla or the cerebral cortex type processes which have that. I find that this is true when we want to look at this really in terms of the autonomic nervous system. Would look like that. Okay. And then the next interesting thing is, before we would be getting into a real regeneration, just as I mentioned with a mouse that could run away, first there would have to be a reactivation happening to get us back into normality, right? So, and I would call this a switch or a hope trigger, which is which dissolves the freeze, gives us back our power, just like the mouse that then could be running back into its hole or wherever, into freedom. And this means a sympathetic activation. So it is going over the threshold here and first leads to a high activation of the sympathetic.
So what I want you to think about is, what do your clients come to you for? Do they come to you because they have a desire to heal a past trauma? And if you are specifically known as a trauma expert, then they very well may do that. But my guess is that mostly they'll come to you because they have a symptom. They may or may not be aware that there are past things in their life that have kind of dragged them down, maybe that they still struggle with. But most of the time, people don't, the reason they don't get it, and the reason they can develop complex symptoms is they don't have that connection. But we have a duty of care to be very mindful about how we go in with our language and with us telling people, oh, well, you've got that, so it's about that. So what was going on in your life around this time? You know, how we go in with our information to ask what we know is the right questions is very important, okay? So it's about knowing what is your intention. And if I had time, I'd play you a little clip of Babette Rothschild, who talks about in trauma recovery therapy and trauma therapy, the paramount aim of therapy is to improve quality of life. So even if we know that by closing a trauma, by completing an event and helping to discharge a trauma, if that person is resistant to going there, then there is a reason for that. And I do another talk about there's no such thing as secondary gain, because if you are getting a resistance, then it is not safe yet for them to go there. So I believe our job is mostly to begin with psychoeducation, helping them understand survival response, body intelligence, how our body has managed and coping, helping them feel better about what's going on before we move into doing any kind of therapy on. And I used to do it the other way around, don't get me wrong. I used to love going in there knowing exactly what it was about, kind of pushing the button, woo, okay, now we work on that, and we clear that, okay? And the more I learned about, I guess, respecting the client, the more I realized that it is important to check other things first. There was quite a well-known saying in the energy therapy world about, you know, it took a split second to create a trauma, it can take a split second to reverse it. Well, that is true. But what you have to bear in mind is, if that happened 20 years ago and somebody has built a life of managing themselves for 20 years, all of that has been built on top of that. And people can do something called decompensate. So if you take away the structure that they are using on a day-to-day basis, then they can lose the ability to compensate for other things going on in their life. And what you don't want to do is to cause that decompensation, or cause that person is not ready with other resources in order to be able to do that. And that's why I think the mental health plan is really the key. So I think
now I'll go in a completely different direction. No. So what is the immune system in a mental health perspective? For me, the first challenge we have is that we have something we call the immune system, because the immune system is a lot of different systems working together. And in Danish, they use a lot of work like defense when they talk about or attack when they talk about the immune system. So you're having this little army inside your body, and it can either defend or attack you. And it's just like you're creating a very interesting story about the immune system. So I think if we can create a new word for what the immune system represents, that would be amazing.
That was the darkest time of my life. So now I find myself in this therapy room. We all sat down there in a row, and we were meant to draw a picture and expressing the way we were feeling, expressing our conflict on a big paper like this. And each one would go to the front of the group and start talking about what we felt inside us. So I waited to be the last one. Everybody was showing their pictures. You had dark pictures, brown colors, aggression, lightning, and then it came to my turn, and I walked up there. I put up my picture. And my picture was a butterfly with rainbow colors. That's why when I saw you with all those rainbows, I had to think of my butterfly. I saw, yeah, like all those bright colors. I had the spectrum, the flowers, and I stood there and I was just quiet, and they were staring at me and they thought, is she crazy? We are all sick here. We are all, it was a special clinic for sexually abused women, and we were all like wrecked. And I was standing there with this butterfly, and I didn't say a word. And then I opened up my mouth. I said, that's me.